everyone, get comfortable and let me take you into today's stories. My friend Macy was just 13 when she began giving everything of herself to save her younger sister Zada, who suffered from aplastic anemia and needed constant blood, bone marrow, and organ donations. By 16, Macy had donated over 500 pints of blood, undergone 6 bone marrow procedures, given Zada a kidney and 60% of her liver. By 18, Macy weighed only 87 pounds, taking 23 pills daily to keep her remaining organs working. Her dream of motherhood was gone, her immune system ruined, and her bones broke at the slightest touch. But Zada thrived, living the teenage life Macy had sacrificed for. 2 years later, Macy was diagnosed with lymphoma, likely due to the immense stress her body had endured. She didn't cry or complain. All she wanted was one simple thing: to ring the remission bell in the hospital lobby, a tradition for patients finishing their cancer treatment. She had watched dozens of others do it, celebrated by their families, and for once, she wished to be the one celebrated. She texted the family group chat, asking them to come June 15th. Zada responded immediately with hearts, and everyone promised to be there. On that morning, Macy did her makeup for the first time in 2 years and styled her hair. Throughout her final treatment, nurses asked how she felt, and she kept saying, "Amazing. My family's coming to see me ring the bell." At 2:45, she waited in the lobby, hands trembling with excitement. By 3 p.m., no one had arrived. The bell coordinator asked if she was ready. "Just a minute, they're probably parking," Macy replied. At 3:05, she texted, "I'm at the bell waiting for you." Zada read it but didn't respond. Calls to Zada and her mom went unanswered, and her dad finally answered, explaining Zada's surprise college acceptance party for Berkeley was happening that same day. Macy collapsed onto a lobby bench, realizing the mix-up. "We'll celebrate later," Zada shouted into the phone. Macy hung up, standing alone in a lobby full of patients and families dressed in yellow. She walked to the bell, meant to ring it 3 times, but rang once. A few people clapped awkwardly, and tears began to fall. Pamela, the head nurse who had supported Macy every step of the way, ran over and hugged her. "I gave her everything," Macy whispered through tears. "I gave her my body. I can't have kids because of it. I gave her everything, and she..." The next Sunday was the family dinner, and Macy almost didn't go. But old habits die hard. She walked in, and everyone was still talking about Zada's Berkeley acceptance. Nobody mentioned the bell or congratulated her on finishing treatment. Halfway through, Mom casually asked, "Oh, Macy, did you do your little bell thing?" Macy froze. "My little bell thing? The hospital bell for beating cancer?" She shrieked. Zada laughed. "Macy, you're so dramatic. It's just a bell. You beat cancer either way." The room went silent as Macy glared at her parents, who had already returned to eating. "You know what?" Macy said, voice steady and cold. "You're right, Zada. It's just a bell. Just like your acceptance letter is just paper. Doesn't change anything, right?" Zada rolled her eyes. "Why do you always make everything about you?" "We get it. You donated, you had cancer, but we have lives too." Macy stood abruptly. "I donated, okay? How about I donate your acceptance letter to the fireplace?" She marched toward the framed letter. Dad jumped up, gripping her wrist, while Mom started yelling about her being selfish. Zada didn't even look up from her phone. Macy pulled back hard, freeing her arm, but Dad stayed between her and the fireplace, hands raised. Tears streamed down her face as she listed everything she'd given. The blood draws every 2 weeks that left her weak, bone marrow extractions that drilled into her hips, the kidney surgery at 14, the liver donation that nearly killed her, missing school events, the 23 pills she had to take daily, and the fact she'd never have children because of it. Zada finally glanced up, rolling her eyes like Macy was overreacting. Mom continued yelling about ingratitude, and Dad shook his head, looking at her like she was the problem. Macy pushed past him, slammed the door, and ran to her car. Hands shaking, she dropped her keys twice before sitting inside, sobbing uncontrollably. Her phone buzzed. Pamela, checking in. Pamela called right after dinner, her voice soft and worried as I answered with a sob. She told me to come over immediately and not go back home under any circumstances. I drove the 15 minutes to her cozy house near the hospital while she stayed on the phone, and when I arrived, she was already on the porch, rushing to hug me as I broke down completely. She helped me inside, made chamomile tea, and wrapped me in a blanket scented with lavender fabric softener. Between sobs, I told her how my family had ignored my bell ceremony, how they couldn't spare 10 minutes despite everything I had given to keep Zada alive. Pamela didn't defend them or tell me I was overreacting. She simply listened, handed me tissues, and made sure I drank my tea. When I finally stopped crying around midnight, she set up the couch with sheets and pillows, and I fell asleep in my dinner clothes, waking to sunlight streaming through the window. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Mom and countless texts calling me selfish and dramatic. Dad's texts were calmer, asking me to come home and talk, but I deleted them all. Pamela was in the kitchen making breakfast and reassured me that I didn't have to go back if I wasn't ready. We ate quietly. Then she reminded me of my follow-up appointment at the hospital, driving me there herself. The doctor immediately noticed my distress. I weighed 85 pounds, my eyes red and puffy. Pamela explained the bell ceremony, and the doctor expressed real concern, suggesting I talk to someone about the stress. He wrote down Jonas Hodge's name, a specialist in family trauma and medical PTSD, who had an opening that same afternoon. Pamela drove me to his office, making sure I went inside. Jonas was younger than I expected, with kind eyes, and listened patiently to my entire story. When he asked what I wanted from my family, I realized I had never thought about that before. Always focused on what they needed from me. Afterwards, Pamela drove me back, only to find Zada on the porch, annoyed, saying Mom and Dad had sent her to fetch me, canceling her own plans for me. I refused to go home, and Zada stood with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed. She accused me of being petty over a stupid bell and making everything about myself. When I reminded her of the kidney, liver, and bone marrow donations, she just shrugged, saying it was my choice and nobody forced me, and she couldn't blame them for living their lives. Pamela watched silently, her jaw tight. Zada grabbed her keys, shook her head, and muttered, "Whatever, Macy, when you're done with your pity party, maybe you'll remember we're your family," before slamming the car door and speeding off. I broke down again, and Pamela guided me inside, making tea while I sat staring at nothing. She was only 5 when this started, Pamela said quietly. To her, helping Zada had always seemed natural, but it didn't make the hurt go away. 3 days passed with me sleeping on Pamela's couch, helping with small tasks just to feel useful. On the 3rd morning, I saw Dad's truck in the driveway. He walked up alone, looking tired and older. Pamela answered the door and I came out. He apologized immediately, saying he messed up and wanted to take me to lunch to make things right. Pamela gave me a look, but I grabbed my jacket anyway. We went to the diner we used to visit when I was little, sitting by the window. Dad ordered coffee while I stuck to water. "Macy, we love you," he said. We got carried away with Zada's Berkeley news. I showed him the family group chat from 2 weeks ago, filled with promises that everyone would be at my bell ceremony. He stared at it silently, then asked, "When are you coming home?" I told him I needed space to figure out who I was outside of being the family donor. He paid for my untouched water and drove me back to Pamela's without saying another word. That afternoon, we looked at apartment listings online and found a small studio near the hospital that accepted disability payments. The next day, we saw it. It was tiny, with peeling paint and old appliances, but sunlight streamed through the window in the morning. I signed the lease using my disability check for the deposit. Pamela took time off work to help me move, packing my few clothes and medical supplies in 2 trips. She set up a thrift store bed and stocked the kitchen with easy-to-digest foods. That evening, my phone rang nonstop. Mom had found my room empty and left a flood of angry voicemails, calling me selfish. My mom kept calling and texting, accusing me of tearing the family apart, even threatening to call the police because I hadn't checked in. In the background, I could hear Dad reminding her I was 20 and could live where I wanted. I turned my phone off and sat on the bed in my new empty apartment, feeling both liberated and terrified. The next week, Jonas helped me write a letter to my family during our session. We spent the hour carefully choosing words, setting boundaries, and explaining what I needed from them going forward. The main point was family therapy if they wanted any relationship with me at all. Jonas mailed it for me since I couldn't trust myself not to discard it. A few days later, I saw a flyer at the community center for a cancer survivor support group run by Freya Mansfield. I went to the next meeting and sat quietly at the back, listening to stories. When Freya asked if anyone wanted to share, I raised my hand and told them about the bell ceremony. Several people nodded knowingly, and one woman even cried. After the session, Freya welcomed me and hoped I'd keep coming back. For the first time, I felt truly understood. I started attending weekly and gradually shared more of my story. 2 weeks into living alone, I woke up on my bathroom floor, unsure how I'd ended up there. My phone was ringing out of reach. Everything hurt, and my vision was fading. I crawled to where it had fallen behind the toilet, but my hands shook too much to unlock it. The ringing finally stopped, and then I heard pounding on the door. Pamela calling my name. She used the spare key I'd given her and found me curled up, barely conscious. She called 911 and held my hand until the ambulance arrived. At the hospital, they put in an IV, and Dr. Dorian Blake, a young ER doctor, sat down and actually listened as Pamela explained my medical history. He ordered tests, admitted me for observation, and said my body was shutting down from malnutrition and dehydration. He connected me with a nutritionist specializing in patients with complex digestive issues from multiple organ donations. The next morning, I woke to voices and saw Freya with 3 people from the support group holding cards and flowers. They'd heard I was in the hospital and came to check on me, even though we barely knew each other. One woman brought homemade soup, another a stack of books she thought I'd like. They stayed for an hour, talking and making me laugh. And I realized these new friends were doing more for me than my own family had in years. Around noon, I heard my mom yelling in the hallway and then bursting in with Dad behind her, demanding why I hadn't called. I pressed the nurse call button and asked them to leave because the doctor had stressed I needed rest and minimal stress. Mom kept shouting about her rights, but Dorian came in and explained visiting hours were only for supportive visitors and that my recovery could be affected by stress. When they still refused, security escorted them out while Mom continued yelling about how ungrateful I was. That night, I checked my phone and saw Zada had posted on Instagram, calling me dramatic and saying I wouldn't let the family visit me in the hospital, even though they were supposedly worried. Most of her friends agreed until someone from our high school asked if this was the same sister who had received a kidney and part of my liver. More comments followed, recalling all the times I'd been sick from donating. Zada deleted the post, but screenshots were already spreading, and Pamela showed me one where someone described seeing me pass out in chemistry after a bone marrow donation. 3 days later, Dr. Dorian Blake signed my discharge papers, including a strict nutrition plan and twice-weekly check-ins with the medical team. Pamela drove me home, stayed all day helping me manage medications and meals, and made sure I ate every 2 hours. That week, Jonas suggested I start journaling about my life without my family's constant demands. That night, I filled pages with forgotten dreams, traveling, taking online classes, learning guitar, going to concerts, eating out without worrying about Zada needing another organ. 2 days later, Dad emailed me saying, "Let's fix this," promising family therapy if I came home first. I replied that therapy had to come first, because my mental health required stability. Jonas had already stressed this was essential for my recovery. Dad called me stubborn and said Mom cried every day, but I ignored it and focused on a hospital social worker helping me apply for assistance. She went pale when she saw all I'd donated so young and asked if my parents had pressured me. I explained it had just become expected to give whatever Zada needed. She made copies and said there might be programs for young donors. At the next support group, Freya asked if I'd share my story. I trembled but spoke about growing up as the healthy sister and being expected to give endlessly. When I told them about the bell ceremony and my family choosing Zada's party over my moment, several people cried, and one woman came over to hug me, whispering that she understood. For the first time, I felt truly seen. After the support group, an older woman named Carol came over and shared that her family had gone through something similar when her brother was sick, and she was expected to always be strong. She gave me her number and told me to call anytime I needed someone who truly understood feeling invisible in your own family. The next day, Mom reluctantly agreed to one family therapy session but insisted on bringing her longtime therapist. Jonas warned me this might be more about Mom controlling the narrative than real progress. The session was set for Thursday at 2. I arrived early to speak with Jonas, but Mom and her therapist were already there, whispering and reviewing papers, probably lists of my supposed flaws. Mom's therapist, an older woman with gray hair pulled tight, immediately began talking, framing Mom as the victim of Zada's illness and painting me as attention-seeking. Jonas tried to redirect with medical records documenting the physical toll of my donations, but Mom's therapist dismissed it, claiming physical sacrifice didn't negate emotional manipulation. Mom nodded, adding that I had always been dramatic and jealous of Zada's achievements. I started shaking, and Jonas tried to focus the discussion on the missed bell ceremony, but Mom's therapist called it performative and an overreaction. That's when Jonas calmly and firmly laid out every donation I had made with dates and consequences, questioning why psychological support had never been provided. Mom exploded, accusing him of bias and attacking the family. Her therapist stood with her, claiming this wasn't productive and left, taking Mom with her. I sat trembling on the couch while Dad remained silent, staring at his hands. Jonas waited until they were gone, then asked Dad if he wanted to continue. Dad nodded, sat in the chair Mom had left, and reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded check. His hand shook slightly as he smoothed it on his knee, saying he'd been reflecting since our lunch and wanted to make things right. Dad handed me a check for $30,000, saying he'd calculated my medical bills and wanted to help. I stared at it, both amazed and uneasy, feeling like he might be trying to buy forgiveness. Jonas asked what Dad hoped the money would accomplish, and he admitted it couldn't fix the past but could help my future. I accepted it because I needed it, but told Dad that money couldn't repair our broken relationship. He nodded, promising to keep trying, maybe even attend individual therapy with Jonas. We scheduled him for the following week, and he hugged me. A real hug, not the quick pat he usually did. A few nights later, Zada showed up at my apartment, reeking of vodka and crying about how everyone at Berkeley orientation thought she was horrible. She ranted about people sharing my story online and calling her selfish, insisting she hadn't asked for my organs and it wasn't her fault Mom and Dad made me donate. I guided her to the couch and made coffee while she vented, knocking the cup over in frustration. I sat beside her and explained I didn't hate her, but she needed to see the reality of what happened. I brought out the folder with my medical records and photos from treatments. Zada's face turned pale as she flipped through images of me at 73 pounds, covered in bruises and tubes, the surgery notes, and records of complications and permanent damage. She recoiled at the photo after my liver surgery and the fertility report declaring I'd never have children. She vomited, and I held her hair back as she sobbed. When she calmed, she asked why I had done all of it if it destroyed me. I told her I did it out of love and to keep her alive. She cried again, this time with fear, confessing she worried she'd never live up to my selflessness as she pursued medicine and felt like a fraud for taking so much from me. I reassured her that her life and choices were her own, and she didn't have to carry my sacrifices as a weight. Zada realized she didn't need to follow my path. She needed to be herself, but also to understand the sacrifices others made and never take them for granted. She asked if she could stay, so I made up the couch for her. We talked until sunrise, confessing fears we'd never voiced. How terrified she had been during her illness and how guilty she felt now, seeing what it had cost me. She admitted she'd convinced herself the donations weren't a big deal because acknowledging the truth meant admitting she'd contributed to destroying my body. I reminded her she was just a child back then, and it wasn't her fault. But now she had choices for how to move forward. She fell asleep on the couch, and I watched the sunrise from the kitchen, feeling like something had finally shifted. The following week, Zada arrived at our parents' house during Sunday dinner and declared she wanted real family therapy, not the mock session with Mom's therapist. Mom protested immediately, saying they didn't need a stranger telling them how to be a family, But Zada interrupted, warning she'd defer Berkeley for a year and tell everyone it was because her family was too dysfunctional to support her education if they didn't agree. Mom went pale. Berkeley had been her pride. Dad supported therapy, mentioning he'd already started individual sessions with Jonas. Mom looked betrayed, but Zada showed her the partially completed deferment form, and Mom relented, agreeing to one session with Jonas while muttering she didn't need therapy. When we met with Jonas that Friday, the office felt different with all four of us there, genuinely trying to work through things instead of fighting. Mom started her usual speech about doing her best, but Jonas redirected her to discuss her feelings during Zada's illness. She admitted being so terrified of losing Zada that she had neglected to see me as a separate person with my own needs. Watching Zada nearly die had broken something in her, and she couldn't handle thinking about my struggles at the same time. Dad opened up about feeling like a failure for not being able to fix Zada's illness or shield me from extreme sacrifices, pretending everything was fine because admitting the truth meant acknowledging his failures as a father. Zada surprised everyone by confessing she had used my sacrifices to shield herself from survivor's guilt, minimizing what I had given to avoid facing that she was alive because I had given up parts of myself. Jonas encouraged us to sit with these feelings without rushing to fix them. Mom broke down, crying harder than I had ever seen since Zada's diagnosis, apologizing for not knowing how to be a good mother to both of us. When she calmed, she looked at me and said she was truly sorry for missing my bell ceremony. No excuses, just pure apology. Dad squeezed my hand while Zada stared at her shoes, quiet and introspective. After the session ended, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, letting everything sink in. Then I texted Pamela with an idea that had been forming in my mind. I wanted my own bell ceremony, a redo with the people who had actually been there for me during treatment. Pamela responded immediately with heart emojis and promised to help organize it. Within an hour, Freya from my support group was on board too. Dorian replied, saying he'd switch shifts to attend. By that evening, 12 people from my support group had confirmed they were coming. The next morning, Mom called, asking if we could meet for coffee. At the small cafe near the hospital, she asked about the redo ceremony Pamela had mentioned. I told her it was happening next week and watched her face fall when I didn't immediately invite her. She started to suggest the family could attend, but I stopped her. They needed to show me they were serious about changing first. 3 more therapy sessions with Jonas, real ones where everyone participated, and only then might they earn the right to be there. Mom's jaw tightened, but she nodded, promising they'd attend every session. That week, our first follow-up with Jonas revealed more layers. Dad shared stories of his childhood, how his own father never showed emotion, teaching him that providing meant working hard and staying silent about feelings. Zada opened up about the pressure she felt to be perfect since I had given up so much for her survival. How every achievement had to justify what I had lost. Mom struggled, but eventually admitted she had always seen me as the strong one, assuming I could handle anything. Jonas helped us see how these patterns had built walls between us, and for the first time, it felt like we were truly talking instead of past each other. The second session was harder. Jonas had us practice active listening, repeating what the other person said before responding. Zada got frustrated hearing me describe the physical pain of my donations, the bone marrow needle burning through my skeleton, months of weakness after giving up my kidney. She vomited halfway through and returned pale and shaking. The third session focused on making amends without expecting forgiveness. Each of them had to tell me what they were sorry for and what they would do differently moving forward. Dad promised to see me as an individual, not just in relation to Zada. Mom vowed to stop minimizing my struggles and to show up for small moments, not just the big ones. Zada cried through her apology, admitting she had taken my sacrifices for granted and promising to honor them by being grateful instead of guilty. On the morning of my redo ceremony, I woke up nervous but excited. At the hospital, Pamela had decorated the lobby with yellow ribbons, my favorite color. My family was quietly sitting in the corner. Dad held a bouquet of sunflowers, and Mom had a gift bag containing a photo album she'd made of my treatment journey, complete with notes from nurses and doctors praising my bravery. Zada wore a shirt that read, "My sister is my hero," specially made for the occasion. When it was time, I walked to the center of the lobby, rang the bell, and finally felt all the love and support I had truly earned surround me. I rang the bell with Pamela on one side and Freya on the other, and the lobby was packed with people from my support group, nurses from my treatment team, even some patients I'd met during chemo. Jonas stood with my family, placing a hand on Mom's shoulder when she started crying again. I grabbed the rope and rang the bell once, clear and strong, then twice, and finally a third time so hard the sound echoed through the whole hospital. Everyone erupted in cheers and applause, and Zada recorded it all on her phone, tears streaming down her face. Pamela hugged me tightly and whispered how proud she was. People surrounded me, celebrating, and it was everything I had wanted the first time. Later, we moved to Pamela's house for a small party she organized. My family not only came but stayed, helping serve food and finally talking to people about my journey. Mom sat with Pamela for an hour, asking detailed questions about my treatment, the hardest days, and how Pamela had seen me struggle, genuinely wanting to understand what she'd missed. Dad helped clean up without being asked, telling Dorian how grateful he was I'd had good doctors looking out for me. During the party, Zada stood and clinked her glass, announcing she was using part of her college fund to start a foundation for sibling donors. She'd already filed the paperwork to call it the Macy Foundation, aimed at providing support and recognition for siblings who donate to family members, and she wanted me on the board to guide its mission. The next month, I started volunteering at the hospital, working with teenagers undergoing cancer treatment. Dorian introduced me to the pediatric oncology team, who immediately put me to work. The kids connected with me because I remembered the little things, the taste of chemo lingering in your mouth, or how frustrating it is when people call you strong when you just want to be normal. After my first week, Dorian told me I had a gift for making patients feel seen and heard, not just treated. The head of pediatric oncology even asked if I'd consider working part-time once I was stronger. My family began a new tradition of monthly dinners, sharing something important, something they needed support with, and something they were grateful for. At first, it felt awkward, but by the third month, it became natural. Mom brought a notebook to write things down. Dad started sending random texts to check in or make me laugh. And Zada called before every big test or presentation, not for advice, just to hear my voice. 6 months passed, and my body began recovering beyond what doctors expected. My weight climbed to 95 pounds, my cheeks had color again, and my hands stopped shaking. I could walk upstairs without stopping to catch my breath. Dad started showing up at my apartment every Tuesday with printouts about vocational rehabilitation programs. He spread them across my kitchen table, and we went through each one while he made notes about deadlines and requirements. He found programs that let me take classes online at my own pace and never once mentioned Zada or compared our education paths. One program offered medical coding certification, and Dad helped me fill out every form and even drove me to the assessment appointment. The night before Zada's first day at Berkeley, she called me at 2 a.m., crying, thanking me for everything I'd given her and promising she'd become the kind of doctor who sees the whole family, not just the sick kid. We cried on the phone for an hour as she told me she'd been reading about sibling donors and finally understood what I went through. Mom began sending me articles about medical trauma in families every few days, and eventually signed up for therapy with a specialist for parents of sick children. Her emails became longer and more honest, and one day she sent me an apology without excuses, admitting she'd been so scared of losing Zada that she forgot to see what she was losing with me. Pamela called one afternoon with news that she'd been promoted to head of nursing education and wanted me to speak to new nurses about family dynamics and supporting sibling donors. I agreed immediately and spent weeks preparing my presentation with photos and medical records. The first time I spoke to a room full of nursing students, they all took notes and asked questions about things I'd never thought anyone cared about. 3 months later, the hospital administration contacted me about creating new protocols for sibling donors. They reviewed my case and realized there were no support systems for kids like me. The committee met weekly, designing requirements for psychological evaluations and counseling for donor siblings. They called it the Macy Protocol, and I cried in the conference room. The program would require hospitals to provide mental health support and recognition ceremonies for sibling donors. Thanksgiving arrived, and for the first time, my family planned the entire menu around my dietary restrictions. Mom called 2 weeks before to get a list of foods I could eat. Zada researched recipes and tested dishes that worked with my damaged digestive system, making 3 kinds of stuffing until she found one I could handle. Dad grilled plain chicken just for me while everyone else had turkey, and they set up a section of safe foods with labels so I knew exactly what I could eat. Nobody commented on my needs or acted like it was a burden. We all sat around the table with Pamela, Dorian, and Freya as my chosen family. Mom had invited them without me asking and set places for them like they'd always belonged. Zada kept checking if I needed anything, and Dad even turned off the football game so we could all talk. Pamela told stories about my strength during treatment that my parents had never heard. Dorian explained how my volunteer work was changing the way young doctors thought about patient families, and Freya shared how my story had inspired other survivors in our support group to set boundaries with their own families. After dinner, we played board games and nobody mentioned Berkeley, grades, or any achievements. We simply existed together, a family where every person truly mattered. Watching my biological family finally see me for who I am, alongside my chosen family who had always understood me, I realized something essential. I was no longer just the girl who survived cancer, or the one who gave pieces of herself for others. I was recognized and valued for my whole self, beyond what my body had endured. My experiences mattered, my struggles mattered, and my recovery mattered. The emptiness that used to weigh on my chest whenever I saw other families together began to ease. This was what I had longed for all along, and it had taken losing so much to finally feel it. Sharing this story with you has been truly meaningful, and I hope it moves others just as deeply as it has moved me.